Engineering is not a software problem, it's a people.
Yeah.
It's sort of this, triangle effect. It's people leadership, technology leadership, and business. You need all three, right? What's that spark that people get the aha moment and then want to do more of that? It's very hard to find it, but your customers will tell you. We get blinded because we're in Silicon Valley. People don't realize 99.9% of the businesses out there are not tech. There's a second wave of innovation, third wave, fourth wave. So it's never done. It's like video isn't done.
Hello everyone. Today we're diving into the trenches with Bruce Wang, a two-time founder who has seen it all, from the dot-com boom to leading engineering at Netflix. Bruce's journey is a masterclass in startup evolution. We'll unpack how he pivoted his company from P2P to enterprise video, battled gems like YouTube, and ultimately led his company to acquisition after 9 years. We'll also explore the essential skills every founder needs: tech, business, and leadership, and the critical balance between timing and perseverance. Get ready for some raw, unfiltered entrepreneurial wisdom. Let's dive in.
I'm Bruce Wang. I'm a two-time founder. Been working at Netflix for about 5 years now. Worked on all sorts of different startups for that, various capacities as CTO, founder, VP, software, whatever, pick your pick. So it's been pretty fun time and learn a lot and still learning. And now I also do seed investment as well as advisory work. I feel like typical immigrant story, right? Maybe a little different, because my dad came when I was really young. I came to the States. I came to the States in 1984, right? So it's super early days. It was before Tiananmen Square, before the Berlin Wall fell. I mean, it was an interesting time in America. Lived in Delaware for a little bit, lived in Buffalo, New York, and then eventually settled in Michigan. And mostly grew up in Michigan. Then I moved to California in 2000.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting time.
Oh yeah. So as we all know, that was during the .com bubble, and I was in the middle of that. I saw all these companies coming out. My dad actually even gave me some money for investments, and none of them worked out because it was such a hot time, and there were so many companies. And at the same time, we had lots of opportunities to interview, to go all over the place. It was really fun. I remember flying to New York to go interview for different banks, and then eventually got an opportunity to join a startup in California, in Mountain View. And so I was like, you know what? This is Silicon Valley. I should be there. And so I was really glad to have that opportunity to come out and then start my journey from.
A lot of people would draw a parallel of the time we're now with the bubble time, and you happen to join a career during 2000. There was a lot of parallel, and then also 2000 there was also crash.
Yeah, 2001. I still remember the crash. Like a lot of companies went down. I was lucky that I didn't get laid off at that time. I was working on an important project for the company, and so I think they were okay. But I feel like this is just tech. There's bubbles. There was the crypto bubble, right? And I think a lot of people saw a hype there, but it didn't sustain. It fizzled out. So then AI kind of came almost right away, right after that, right? So the question is is it different? Is it hype? Is it really as revolutionary as the internet? Because you think about when I went to school, when I went to college in 96, it just had Ethernet in the rooms. You're getting internet early on, Yahoo really early on, web crawlers before Google was even started. And so it was a really early days of technology. And it was so transformed, as a time. And so it's hey, are we in that same time? I think that's the question. And yeah, it's hard to tell. Are the winners today going to be the winners later? Who's going to win that war? Because right now there's a lot of big companies in that space dominating, but there's a lot of up and comers as well. It's fascinating because I still remember when the NASDAQ, I think, hit 5,000 or something. It was such a huge deal. It's now it's technology just grows and businesses just grow. And so I feel even during that time, during the bubble, that was when Amazon came out, Apple was still around. And, all these companies, some of them actually survived or thrived. NVIDIA, Netflix came, during the .com boom, right? Even in the early days, there were these companies that kind of came out and they were just doing their thing. And now it's gigantic, So which one is it? Do they already exist, or are they new players too?
It's hard to say when you are at the moment, but later when it happens, it actually will be more obvious.
I mean, I know this is a founder story, but like why I got into technology is because you can create anything. I still remember it's like, oh, I just have a laptop in my brain and I can do whatever. And it's fascinating to think about every company you see that's huge was small before. Couldn't raise money or didn't have raise money. It's just a fascinating thing where we all like to see the end result. Like, oh, look at this company, it's humongous. It's like, yeah, but if you look back in the early days, they didn't have customers, they didn't have, money, they didn't have the idea maybe even laughed at. And I think that's what's really interesting about the startup journey, similar to as an engineer, is you kind of start from nothing and you can build anything. It's pretty fascinating.
You mentioned about early on you work on the server management.
So I worked at a company called Marimba. And the funny thing is the founders of that Marimba were actually at Sun Microsystems, and they were on Project Oak, the team that helped create Java. And they were like one of the earliest companies that built a company around Java, the language, right? We did like client server management where you like manage desktops. And then I was working on server management technology called Timbali. I still remember trying to learn Java because, in school I'm learning C++ and C. I didn't learn Java. So then I still remember like trying to read. Like,
Java was the hardest language.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and the four founders like worked on Java. Like you would see their name in the source code. It's like pretty fascinating. I think it was about 100, 200 people. It was super hyped because they had like famous co-founders, and Kim Polisi was an early on like thought leader in the space, and she's pretty well known at that time. It was pretty hot startup, but then it's like, how are you actually making money? And we sold basically software to enterprises to manage their servers and their client desktops. Learn Java, learn to do everything from, it's not like I knew how to write Java. And so early on, it's like, yeah, I got to learn to do this job. It's so fascinating. I'm like writing server management. I've never managed a server in my life. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why am I writing this software? It was a fun time. It was really formative for me. I mean, it's actually how I met my co-founder. It was at Marimba that I met my co-founder for my first startup.
You had a great run in that startup. And like, what made you decide to be a founder yourself?
I've always been interested in business. My dad was an entrepreneur, so that helped. But then also just really interested in like business and technology. And like, I always thought, oh, I want to do a company, right? I don't even remember why. It was just kind of like, I want to do it. I need to do it. And I think it's also because during the .com days, everyone was building companies. So you kind of felt like, oh, I should do that too.
One thing you mentioned about it is that family upbringing is actually very important, especially you have a role model, your parents. And when the kids grow up, you will realize that they just have this desire to do the thing.
Well, I think it's because my dad was a researcher. He studied physics, got a PhD in physics, worked in the lab, I think. And it was fine. But it was really him becoming an entrepreneur and succeeding in that like propelled us into a different life, right? So you also like see that, right? The rewards of it. But then I didn't also realize there was huge struggles as well, right? As a kid, they're kind of trying to shield you, right? And I realized there were definitely hard times too. It's like realizing, it's hard to be an entrepreneur, but it gives you that spark.
One of the strengths I feel for young people to doing entrepreneurship is that they don't know what's happening ahead. A lot of times, like the spark is enough, give them the motivation to try it out, and then figure out. And they often get a spark from the role models, like from parents, family members, or sometimes even people they don't know. It actually reminds me myself how I get my startup journey is similar. I was a very, very confusing period of my teenager. All her business actually failed, but I knew I knew how it worked. And then while I was reading some books about some entrepreneurs, I was reading that book was someone who really was actually also taking internet knowledge went back to China and become building a very successful company. And I realized, wow, this is such an awesome role model. Give me the spark and give me the motivations to like work hard, come to the United States and like build my startup. Of course, back then I don't know how hard it is. I thought, okay, it's just doing it and you'll get it. But then in the story journey, you realize, there's actually much more struggle and things.
Actually, you just reminded me. I remember when I was in college, I had friends, and their friend had basically did that, studied in the US and started a company in China and then had a successful company. It was like called China Ren or something. He started China Ren.
Yeah.
Like this is way back. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy, I'm like sitting in his room and he's like, whatever, he's talking
Your
about.
friend might be very famous.
I was like, oh my gosh, he like went back and started a company that everyone knows. This was in the 90s, right? Like early days. So I think that also was a factor, is kind of seeing other people do it. But I think this is the thing, is you see it, the lore, right?
Yeah.
The fame, the wealth, like all the stuff. And it's just like, you don't see the hard work behind. One of the other things I loved following was all the startups that were failing. There was a site that tracked all the sites and all the companies that were going down, because during the dot-com boom, there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so it was really fascinating to see all these companies going down, right? I don't know if you remember, there was an early startup called Webvan, where they were trying to do early grocery delivery. And they like raised a bunch of money and fell down. So you also see that other side where it's like, there's no guarantee either. Right?
But it's actually good. It's actually a strength for young people to do startups, because inherently doing startup, you need to be an optimistic person, have a huge amount of optimism, because you are against the odds anyway. But the interesting part is that someone is going to make a change. Like all of the odds is no. If you really work hard, you will figure it out. So that it's not like just purely random thing. It actually depends on effort. And if you really spend an enormous amount of effort, to realize whoever who has that type of perseverance, the chance is high. But the problem is that most people don't. They either will be scaled off very early on because they know how hard it is, or in middle journey, in the middle way, they realize, wow, they just project how hard it is. But I'm pretty sure in the 2000 years, people also talking about, now a lot of people talking about young entrepreneurs have a lot of advantages. Because they have this optimism. All they don't have the expertise or experiences, but optimism is what you need. Just perseverance, keep pushing. That's very, very important.
But the problem is, if you think about early, when we were doing a startup, this is like AWS was just starting. So early days where you had to like buy servers and data centers. And so the flip side is, it's so easy now. Right? Starting a company, you want to charge credit card, use Stripe, right? You want to serve servers, you want to like build things. It's very quick. But that also lowers the barrier for competition as well. And so like you could start something really quick, but then how do you figure out what's going to make sense? Right? And what's going to get you customers? And I think the other thing, and you know this as well, is just, you might have an idea. Like, so the first startup was the idea to build a P2P management software on top of BitTorrent, because CDN costs were so high, bandwidth is so high. It's like, oh, instead of paying $2 a gig or $3 a gig, let's use peer-to-peer. We pivoted away from that idea. So that's the other thing. You might have an idea of what you want to do, and then you have to figure out, like, will actually anyone pay for it? Will it work? And you can't get too like enamored with your idea.
You have to be flexible enough, and inherently, like, you have to both be super determined and passionate about the vision, but at the same time, you have to be super flexible about what exactly how to do it. Like the other day we talked about, even for Hudson, like, you have to be very determined about exactly you want. But you also have to be very flexible about aiming, like, so that you try all different product formats that actually figure out something people use and pay.
And this is funny. I listened to like this story about Netflix early, right? And then super early on, we shipped DVDs. That business no longer exists. But they were talking about how like they had to figure out like what would make it go. And it was like figuring out like, oh, if we made it easier to select content at that time, pick DVDs, that was the secret. Like, what's the one thing that will actually drive usage, will drive more customers? And it's like, can you figure that out? We've talked about with Hachi as well, right? What's that spark that people get the aha moment and then want to do more of that? It's very hard to find it, but your customers will tell you. You can learn kind of based on their behavior. Like, are they willing, especially for consumer. And the enterprise, it's like, are they willing to pay you? It's actually a very simple transaction, but it's very hard. Just sell to the enterprise.
Back to in the first startup, you did a pivot in the middle idea. How actually you get an initial idea?
Okay, let me tell you the story. It's really fascinating. Okay, so first, the initial idea was actually two of my co-founders, Dave and Dave, had read the paper about BitTorrent that Bram Cohen wrote. And so they came up with the idea of writing a P2P technology on top of that. Sorry, management software on top of that. So they literally wrote a business plan of like, here's what we could do to manage or, create origins. Because peer-to-peer, like you have no control of the origin servers, right?
Right.
And so we're like, what if we actually manage origin servers for people? Then they could use peer-to-peer to exchange content instead of traditional like buy bandwidth and download it from a server, right? So that was the original idea because of the invention of like Bitcoin as a protocol. And so they had wrote the business plan, and a bunch of us were just coming up with ideas, which just random ideas like managing bookmarks and stuff, right? We're like, let's do this bookmark. I still remember we're doing bookmarks, and they pivoted. But like, so those two founders, they kind of had the founding idea.
Yeah.
And so few of us decided to join, and I was the only one who stayed. Because I didn't have obligations, and I'm still young, like coding, and I was working with one of my co-founders was my tech lead before, so I already had a relationship working with him, and so I think we were just crazy enough to go do it. So here's what happened. So we're trying to build this P2P CDN. We build the original prototype, and we're trying to sell it, and it's hard to sell. How do we sell this P2P technology? So we built a video sharing site. Let's build a video sharing site to show off the P2P technology. Right? Because what are the main what are the main files that are big enough that you would need P2P? Video files. So we created a video sharing site called Vlogville, right? As a show of the technology.
Yeah.
Then during that time, guess what happens? YouTube comes out. I still remember it was like wintertime in New York when the founder of Vimeo like launched Vimeo.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my gosh, this is the idea. Right. We should do the video thing. Like forget about the P2P. Let's just do the video. And so actually we pivoted and say, okay, let's build the video sharing site and then let's adapt. So actually one of the things we did was the origin servers that managed the content was all Python, and we changed it to become encoding servers, right? And we're like, okay, we're gonna encode videos and then people can watch it online. But then what happened was YouTube crushed the market, right? They basically dominated the entire consumer market. So most of the companies in that space switched to B2B. And so then we pivoted again. So we're like, well, we're not going to win the B2C space. So we decided to adapt our software so we could sell it. And then that ultimately became Twistage. So, I mean, the name of the company wasn't even Twisted. It was like Row River, but it was like a weird name because the idea was the largest river in the world was Amazon and the smallest was Row River. So the idea was like little bits. Right, made a bit, stupid. Anyway, but then we were finally, it took us a long time to raise money, almost 2 years, right? I mean, I basically wasn't making money for 2 years. We finally were about to raise money, and we're like, okay, we have to change the name. It's like, no one's going to give us with this name. So we switched to Twistage, and then we raised on that, the video management software. So we went from like P2P CDN to a B2C sharing, video sharing site, to then a online video platform where anyone can buy the software and then manage. We manage their videos for them. And that's kind of ultimately the business that we landed on. And we started working on that.
That's actually a fascinating journey. And it's also very, very resonant to me as well. It started with a B2B idea. And then as you're iterating, realize, let's like build a demo application on this B2B. And then B2C, initially the demo, then swap and that become the main thing.
Right.
And then compete in the B2C spaces, but then the situation, the market changes, and going back a little bit of the B2B thing.
Right.
So I think this actually happens for a lot of founders. I have heard a lot of friends who struggling about this B2B and B2C thing. And often people would just like say, your company is a B2B company, your company is a B2C company. But I sometimes feel like its journey is more common. If people are not necessarily B2B or B2C, they want a company to survive, who grow, and whichever parts of the market that has the need, they will do it. And so that depends on like many situations. One thing you mentioned about is, of course, what I have is initially founder market fit. Very suitable for founders to build B2B, but then no one's buying it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then build a demo. You mentioned about the YouTube crash. Did you get some traction earlier, and then YouTube just come and take it?
No, we started the software. We started Vlogville, the sharing site, and I think we didn't realize there were a lot of people in that space. And it was funny because I don't have the deck anymore, but we had created a deck for like investors.
Yeah.
And we had listed out all the different video sharing companies out there. And like YouTube was on it. There was a lot of them at that time.
Yeah.
But then they really took off and owned that, right? And then quickly became huge. And then Google bought them. And then, you know, it was such a big change. I don't think we ever got like the traction we wanted with the, you know, site. It wasn't like, oh, we were like a middle of the road, right? And there was a lot of those kind of sites, right? You had Vimeo who stayed around. Right. You had Daily Motion. There was a lot of video video consumer sites. Yeah. But then it just so happened that YouTube like became the winner, right, in that space. I think the other thing you have to realize is, I realize now looking back, right?
Yeah.
Is you have to also understand the market dynamics change completely, which means your product has to adapt, right? Because think about from 2004 to 2013. So that's the journey, right? 9 years, right? And you think about the two big disruptive things that happened that changed the game. Yeah. One is Amazon came out, AWS. Two is iPhone came out, right? And so you basically have complete change of market dynamics around the cost of bandwidth. You have like a device that literally changed how people use a smartphone. Yeah. And then you have ability to shoot video. It was like the timing in the market with also the drop in cost of managing servers and managing storage. It completely changed the dynamic of everything, right? Yeah, so the P2P wasn't the value anymore. It was about something else. It was about making it easier to manage this kind of big boom. You don't realize is that sometimes as a founder, you're sort of like in it so deep, you don't step back and look at what's actually going on. Yeah. And I think that's why people are so aggressive going after AI right now, because everyone's realizing, okay, this is really changing how we do anything, right? And so every company is like trying to do AI something this, right? Because they feel like they have to adapt to it, you know, which also tells you you're in an age where companies are adapting much faster than before. Yeah. Right? Before old days, it's like build a company, you can take time, you can protect your market for a long time. Now it's like you kind of have to be super paranoid because your market conditions and the technology could really disrupt all the players, right? Which is, I think, why the AI space is so hyped, is because it's disrupting original players. With someone like Google, who even invented some of the technology that powers OpenAI and Anthropic, right? Is disrupting that company. And so I think people are more, extra aware of that. We got to move fast, right?
Exactly, yeah. And like what you mentioned, is actually such a great example of the importance of that flexibility, actual mindset. The situation changes all the time. There's several factors. For example, one factor in your situations might be because of the iPhone time, we significantly reduced the frictions to the video. So that makes it a consumer market to take off. Right. You see happens initially there was a lot of companies in that spaces, but also as the market consolidated, it naturally has the winner take all things. And if you're not happen to be YouTube at a particular moment, you have to do it fast. Otherwise you're gonna be completely crushed. Crushed by or you have to figure out a place where you can differentiate yourself with YouTube. For your case, since you instead of being a video hosting website, you started providing software for people to make the videos themselves. And I find this so fascinating because a lot of that is also so similar. One example of myself was that the first startup I did, Storytel, was a B2B company. And it was based on some insight, of course, of a founder's theme of that time, because I was working in Google research. I know that LM is going to be huge. It's the insight very few people know. I want to leverage that. And the best way to do it in B2B. So I started at a B2B startup. And initially was very, very good. And then suddenly there's this disruptor coming, the job becomes. And then that creates this dynamic. So first of all, the dynamic is that the value you offer to your customer, it used to be like a black magic. So they are willing, the willingness to pay is extremely high. The expectation is very low. As long as it can work, like how the solution is totally fine. And then when this disruptor is coming to buy this, and then the B2B market is become like a super, incredibly hard to do. Unless you go to a super niche that has deep data mode. The people are talking about laws or something, well, also not exactly sure that thing. But the generic B2B things, for example, you have B2B productivity tools, there's nothing can offer at top of the tools that ChatGPT already offer. At the same time, because these tools become popular, it used to be that this technology is only possible in B2B because it takes enormous of efforts to kick off consumer market. like the iPhone moment.
Yeah.
It only happened like once a decade or something.
Yeah.
Before that thing happened, everything has to happen in B2B. But the ChatGPT happens, it's similar to the iPhone thing. It significantly reduced people's like cognitive bandwidth and all education about what, like how they interact with a conversational interface. It used to be one company has to spend an enormous amount of marketing budget to enable that. But ChatGPT does that.
Yeah.
Everyone expect that, and as soon consumer marketing will expand, will become possible. And then there's like a lot of application companies or consumer companies start to show up. We're just about to say that the period, it almost feels like a repeat. What you were saying before, we started saying a lot of like AI companies, like the time, basically the counterpart of the video, YouTube, and period, and also there's a window. That window where YouTube is shown. We don't know which company is YouTube.
Sure.
But that will take off. And then frankly, it's
But I'm going to tell you, here's what's really fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So like YouTube destroys the market. They win the market. And then even in our market, B2B, there were some big players like Brightcove and Ayala that raised a bunch of money, right?
Yeah.
And you think, okay, we're done. They told them the space. And then you fast forward and TikTok comes out. Do you see what I mean? It's so funny because everyone thought, oh, video sharing is done, right? YouTube owns that market. And the B2B space is dominated by these people. But then I never thought there'd be these new B2B and B2C video companies. But then because of like consumer behavior and also just technology, like live streaming Twitch and then like TikTok short video form, there was like Vine and all these other technologies that, did like short form, right? And it's so fascinating because it also shows you that even when you think someone's won, there's a second wave of like innovation, third wave, fourth wave, right?
Yeah,
and so it's never done. It's like video isn't done.
Yeah, it's never done. None of the field will be like done forever. Like any field, like the video, the VR, the AI, they're always high the node. And especially in the more consumer side, it's like when there's a clear winner show up, people might feel like there is less opportunity here. There might be some downtime. But always come by the video cases. That's also a very interesting part is that I realized a lot of startup founders during this period, they will switch back to B2B.
Sure.
Some startup founders will stick to B2C. You find a spot, it's more like a consumer type of software applications like that. What was the thought about when you face this situation in which that the consumer market seems to be consolidated by YouTube? And then how did they identify the place as well?
Yeah, I think it's because because video was still new at that time, everyone was wanting video software. Yeah. So one of our early customers, Kids Bop, they make kids versions of songs. They still have these CDs and digital versions of it now. Yeah. But they wanted to create a social media site for kids, but they didn't want to use YouTube, so they needed someone to manage their video software for them. Because of the disruption of video where people didn't think people would watch videos online, and all of a sudden everyone wanted to watch videos online, that means everyone wants to buy software that allows them to manage videos. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a little bit of just, we were trying to find the customers out there, and then we were starting to see, it's very similar to why it's happening now. The B2C shows that ChatGPT and LLMs could be used to create an experience. Then every company wants to create that experience. Yeah. So then you have a lot of opportunity with B2B to sell that software to them. It's still complicated to manage. You can obviously buy OpenAI's own management software and their own offering, but you can also build your own. And you see a lot of these companies that do the managed experience and things like that. So I feel like we were really similar where because one space changed consumer behavior, then a bunch of businesses want to replicate that behavior. So they wanted to introduce video inside their own sites. And so I think that's kind of a pattern that I think you see.
Yeah. It's so fascinating because the other day I was actually thinking about this dynamics of different consumer behavior and enterprise behavior. Yeah. What you mentioned is so aligned with what I'm observing happening currently in the AI wave is that there's B2B, B2C, and B2B type of trend. That's because initially this new technology disruptor, they oftentimes will require a much clearer use cases for people to commit to develop on that. So the initial thing oftentimes comes B2B. Like In your case, it's like PTP file sharing.
Right.
And then the problem is more clear. I need to share files and various cases. And then people started to get summaries for good development of the technology. For the LLM case, it's like, knowledge workers, they need some tools to improve their efficiency. And if you do this well, someone is going to pay. So the willingness to pay is easily solved. And so some technology is being developed on that. Oftentimes, they'll accidentally keep up some consumer behavior change. The YouTube thing, it's suddenly like, people are not using this P2P or this like file sharing technology to share files. I assume they probably originally was, I'm going to share scientific data or something like that. But then I'm going to check about the video. I want to like watch videos online, change the behavior. In LLM case, it's like, people always say, you need an LLM to like summarize scientific papers for you, protecting. But the end up is like, I'm not counting that. I want to just have more fun or have more entertainment. That will kick off this consumer market. Consumer market will have big players showing up like YouTube. However, this only offers one position for companies win. What other companies they will realize is because there's so many companies and business want to replicate the behavior of the winner, there is opportunity to sell the shoppers. For example, exactly like happens is like so many companies trying to recreate their ChatGPT experience. So there's so many tools for how to implement the chat experience, integrate with existing software. And then it actually comes back to the B2B. So there's the B2B develop the initial technology, take off in the B2C, and that's clear winner here, but there's a lot of more opportunities also.
I think we get blinded because we're in Silicon Valley and it's like, everyone's high tech. But most businesses are not. They're not technology companies. Yes, they're adopting technology, but they didn't start with technology. And see all these companies, look at what happened with Southwest. They have aging software that like completely disrupted and they never upgraded. Like that's the thing is people don't realize 99.9% of the businesses out there are not tech. They're like using technology, right? But they're not a pure tech company, And I think I saw this a lot too, where there's so many industries like in construction and things like that, where it's like technology is really backwards, right? I remember talking to this startup about like managing even manifests when they transport cars. Like just all these processes. It was funny because the company that acquired us actually managed documents. Like basically it was a document management system because there's so much paper. And then they were moving digital. And then the company that owned that software was a printer company. Dude, there's so much business out there that I think you have to be careful that you're not blinded by the industry you're in. Because there's so many problems in the other industries, right? And the technology adoption rate is not at the pace where you think, especially if you yourself is a technologist, right? But most businesses don't behave that way. They're just not at that pace, right? So then how do you sell capabilities to those people? How do they take advantage? If you think about Microsoft's advantage is their ability to tap into the enterprise market. They know how to sell to that market. It's taken Google a long time to figure that out with Google Workplace and stuff like that. It wasn't so easy to just come in and dominate Microsoft. Even though they dominated search, they couldn't just come into the enterprise and be like, just use all our stuff. The enterprises aren't, they're not all technologists.
You also mentioned about a very, very fascinating point is that your company get acquired by a printer company.
Right. So, let me back up. We were acquired by Perceptive Software, which it itself was acquired by Lexmark. And so Perceptive Software was based in Kansas, and then Lexmark was based in Kentucky. Right? So you're talking about very different worlds. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
How you land into the...
Right. Well, look, to be honest, the journey was really long, right? 9 years, right? Look, I was like, hey, I'm going to do 2 years, we'll sell it, and then I'll do another one. I didn't realize it was going to take 9 years. It took a long time, and there were 2 times we wanted to exit. It was tough. Because remember, during the financial crisis, we didn't have traditional financiers. We didn't have traditional VCs. Our VCs were actually in the finance world. And so during the financial crisis, it actually impacted our funding. And so it was just a hard slog for us. And we were trying to be profitable versus grow. Not like a traditional tech company, because our investors are expecting like, aren't you going to turn profits on? And so it was just very hard. So we actually tried to exit before and it didn't work. And then when we got a little farther along, we became profitable at least, then we were able to find a buyer. And so we had, hired a banker to try to find a seller. And it just so happened that they happened to be looking. But here's what's really fascinating. Perceptive Software was bought by Lexmark because Perceptive Software managed documents digitally. Lexmark's a printer company, but they know that they need to move toward digital, right? Because everyone's printing less and less. And then the digital management company realized, okay, we have text management, but what about video, right? And so one of our biggest customers was in the B2B space, managing videos for enterprise. So I think that kind of sold them, we can manage, video content as well. But there was actually a second reason, and we didn't realize that till later. We were native cloud, right? So we adopted Amazon AWS when it was still private beta, right? We had to get someone to get us in, but that was how early we were. And so we were using that technology and how we thought about managing cloud and SaaS and DevOps mentality. I mean, we were using DevOps mentality before it was a thing, right? It's like, oh, we deployed at cost and time. And we were really native SaaS. And I think that was the other reason, is they were trying to figure out, their shrink wrap software that was trying to do hosted, and they're trying to move to SaaS. And I think they were told like, hey, you're gonna have to get someone who's like native SaaS, native cloud, to really help you transition. And then it was just, we happened to find a buyer. So it was the second time getting a banker to exit, right? It's a long time. You're kind of like, this is a lifestyle business. It's never going to be huge. And so it just worked out. And yeah, we got acquired. We're still small. So it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I exited and now I can retire, right? And here's what's really fascinating. This is something that I'll just tell you that personally, just a personal journey of mine, is to exit a company where most investors like made money and feel like crap because you see everyone else, YouTube exit for 1.6 billion, right? We did not exit for that much. And so it was really fascinating, just my own personal sense of failure. It was fascinating because I always thought, if I'm going to do a company, I'm going to make hundreds of millions. It was just a weird mentality and that my success was based on some number.
Yeah.
And I didn't, it was silly, but it was like, we exited, it was okay. But it's just, that was like a side thing, just personally. It was just like, hey, we're done. And it was a positive outcome, but it wasn't like, I didn't feel fulfilled, Yeah. But what I think now, as you get older, you realize it was such a great experience because it took me into the world of enterprise, really understood the enterprise space. You understood the enterprise space and how they sell. Even in specific industries, like the medical industry, it's its own world. And so that gave me a lot of experience on seeing how enterprise software works for real and what you need to do to go into that space. And Marimba was enterprise software as well, but Perceptive was even more so. And then Lexmark obviously was a long time enterprise. They sold enterprise printers, but so I think it was just a great experience. And ultimately it was just another set of experiences for me and actually gave me opportunity to lead a much larger team. We were in a small startup. When we exited, we were only probably 15, 20 people. It was pretty tiny. And then ultimately when we got acquired, I switched roles and I ended up taking over a much bigger team to build out our cloud strategy, right? So it was good. It was a good experience for me and it actually really taught me, you mentioned earlier about engineering leadership. That was where I got a lot of my formal leadership training. Right? Just how to be a better manager, how to be a better leader. It was kind of beyond just exiting, it was also just the experience that I got.
So one thing you mentioned is very interesting. You are a native SaaS company.
Yeah.
Which is also a trend when you're doing this company. There's a trend of going to standalone, you need to do the server to the native SaaS. And the reason your company get acquired that was also part of the reason. I'm curious about your experience of building the native SaaS. Because SaaS was actually popular by that time, was actually SaaS become a thing.
Yeah.
Now everyone's saying that SaaS, AI platform, that's
right.
What was your perspective of SaaS?
Because I was in the enterprise software space, right? And we used to ship software, right? And so you think about Marimba, you buy our software, you get a 20%, support contract. It's a multi-year deal. Then we deploy professional services, deploy the software. So us as developers, we finish writing it. We don't even know what happened. With the customer usage, what was being used, how was it being used? And what's fascinating is the monetary money spent on software was not related to usage, right? Think about it. You buy the software, you could just put it on the shelf and not use it. You can't deploy the product. You hear all these stories. I'll spend millions of dollars on a contract and you can't deploy it. And I think what SaaS changed, it actually changed the financial model. where we have to do good because you pay us when you use it. And so when I think about native SaaS, it's about your business model built around usage. And so what's fascinating is you actually more directly tie your like business to the usage of it. Like now it's like, no one questions that, right? Now it's like, of course you do that.
Right.
But remember in 2000, that's not how software works. You buy a big contract, it gets deployed, maybe they'll use it, maybe they won't. Yeah. And even if they use it, it might suck and they don't like it. And so I think for me, what was fascinating about understanding SaaS is just the usage patterns, even like the behavior of how salespeople were incentivized. I remember having this really fascinating conversation with the AWS rep. Right? He used to work for a big company that was not native cloud. Then he goes work for AWS. And he was telling me how like, it's not just about me landing a deal with you now. Right. It's about how you use it and grow our usage. So if I just make your money right now, I'll screw you over if you don't end up wanting it. And so I can get you to sign something. If you don't end up using it, it's actually worse for me. So their compensation model is not just based on volume, how much you can sell right now. It's about growing that business over time. When I think about native SaaS, it's not a technology necessarily. It's about aligning business incentives where it's like, I write software and you use it and you pay me. Yeah, it sounds really silly, but that's not how software works.
Exactly. Yeah. I think this is such a great insight about the native SaaS, because a lot of us, when we started to putting the technology in different category, oftentimes say, oh, we use technology perspective. Right. But if we think really about the SaaS, it's the same thing, it's software. The main difference, whether it's native or not, is the business model. Is like you charge by usage versus you charge by delivery. And then it change the whole dynamics, that including how the software is going to be built, how the software is going to be delivered, how the operation look like, and that requires a fundamentally different way of operate a company. And when you mentioned about the native SaaS startup, that's actually such an intriguing thing, because a lot of the bigger companies, when they build their startup, like companies in the early stage, they wouldn't operate in the same way. And when they need to adopt it, oftentimes they will realize it's impossible. Yeah. And if they really are determined, that oftentimes they need to acquire a startup who already are native. In that pattern to doing that. And this is also really relevant to us. There's a lot of discussion about native AI applications or native AI. A lot of people will think, oh, whether you use LLM or not. I think that it's actually very related to what your definition of native SaaS. It actually is about the business model. It's about how the relationship of the producers and the consumers in this thing. Before the SaaS was based on a package of software. After it was like a unit of the thing.
It was basically then convincing you should buy it. Because it will solve all the problems. Whereas you flip it, it's like you have to solve the problems and then we'll buy more of it.
Exactly. I think that even like nowadays in the native AI thing, there's also discussion. The SaaS, one of the the iconic things for the SaaS is subscription model. And people started to question about it, because if you think about OpenAI, they charge by subscription model and lost $5 billion a year. And then no one in the company, except that it's very specific needs. For example, I heard someone like who's doing an AI Bible, they can do it. But most of the SaaS subscription are losing money. And so people started questioning about, is this the right thing? And there's a discussion about charge by not a subscription, but a result.
It's because if you think about the fundamental cost structures, it's all about producing the model itself. That doesn't come from usage. The seats don't work that way. We've taught you, kind of the one who introduced me to this, is the cost model and complexity model is completely different. It's not about the problem at time of usage. It's about all the training that has to happen before that, and all the costs is already incurred. You can't pass that cost on directly. So you have to figure out how to change.
Exactly. So what I mentioned is such on point. OpenAI, let's take an example. Like they're losing money at $5 billion a year. And they often add this argument that if we don't count the time the money we put on the training, we're actually profitable. But this is a false statement. How would not count the training? Because the training in the traditional SaaS is almost zero. You don't need training. All the cost structure is coming in the usage. So in that case, it's pay by subscription to make sense on your users.
Because remember, the business model tie-ins on both sides. Both you pay me and my cost structure is based on that usage.
Right.
I think that's where it's broken.
Yeah.
Because your cost model is not based on that usage, it's based on something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's actually the challenge right now, is because a lot of people they study this ChatGPT, and they this either pays through the token usage or pays through subscription is purely based on inference costs on the same. But the problem is like in the mindset of consumers, they say, oh, I have this GPU thing, and then this is the cost, and you shouldn't charge too much. So they
Yeah,
were adding
exactly.
on the
Of course, absolutely.
the
Yeah, yeah.
inference thing. But then in these business models, no one is counting for the training costs and all the investment R&D
Right.
costs for the future, which is probably 80-90% of cost
Right.
overall. And that's one of the reasons why the subscription model is unlike the trend people are talking about is agentic AI in the 2025. Many people think that the agentic AI is about a particular way of combining workflow and things,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it that way. I think it's actually moving into chat by result. As soon as agentic, a lot of the movement is that I'm going to deliver you a virtual workers that actually give you the result.
Right. Yeah.
And I will deliver you the software you want, and I will get the money back. And so in this sense, it's actually going back a little bit of before the SaaS period.
Sure.
I'm delivering the software too.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
difference is that the generative AI has made the cost of producing software so low.
Yeah.
Because imagine that if you need to build software, you kind of have a team, it takes
Yeah.
like 5 minutes, 10 minutes to deliver
Yeah.
the software, and then you have to charge a lot for
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
which you need to hire a salesman.
Yeah.
And you have to do all these things. But then as we are starting to do this, we have this AI coding thing and all things, the cost of producing the software is marginally zero.
Yeah.
And because of that, you can build software on demand based on the use cases that
Right.
the customer have.
Yeah.
And then make that type of business model work again. You
Yeah.
can still charge by results. In these cases, you don't need salesmen to talk about deals because there's so many software and so rich use cases can automatically happen. Lately, Gen AI type of business model,
Right.
where we're seeing this type of things just unfolding right now.
By the way, while we're having this conversation, I feel like this is why it can be hard as a founder. It's not just about the tech.
Yeah,
You got to think the business model. You've got to think about your team structure. You got to think about like, how would you sell it? There's a lot to do as a founder. And I think it's not about just the raw specific skill. You yourself as a founder have to adapt. You have to become the salesperson. You yourself has to be the product manager. You have to manage the finances. You become the CFO. I feel like that's something, maybe another side of this when you run a company that people don't realize is there's just a lot of other stuff that you have to do than just purely making the code, or
Exactly.
purely working on the model.
Exactly. I also went through the journey of being a technologist, purely work on technology.
Yeah.
I'm a founder. I realized that technology is just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's very, very important to have the technology inside
Right.
so you can
Right.
predict the future.
Right.
But oftentimes it is not even the most important puzzle, like
Right.
how to make the business model work
Right.
and how to actually create a real
Right.
differentiability outside technology is very important. And for many founders with the technology background, it's a big hurdle
Yeah.
to get. And I'm actually also curious about your journey because you had we have very similar technology background.
Yeah.
And we both startup and also in the journey of then become people leaders and build an organization. What stages of life you realize the dilemmas you mentioned? Is there any pivotal moment that made you realize, oh, it's actually much more important than that?
I think we talked about earlier, I became an accidental manager when I first started the company because you're can't hire a bunch of managers, so you just become one. And you don't really realize early on that being a people leader, leading teams is itself a craft. And I think it was after joining Lexmark and getting training and leadership training and then reading more and more books and really understanding that I started realizing technology, like a craft, you can get better at practice. Well, leadership and people is also the same thing. And so I think it takes time for you to realize it's not just the soft skill you're born with. It's something you have to learn and grow and understand. And you have to try and you learn and you figure out what works and doesn't, and then you evolve. And it's really that sort of curiosity in your brain around how do I get better? How do I do better? How do I learn and just get better? That is fascinating to me. The other thing that's fascinating is as work for bigger companies and you see the complexity of working with lots of teams and lots of challenges.
Your first company gets acquired by a bigger company. And then you get a chance to manage a big team and grow as a people leader. Can you share a little bit more about that?
As a startup, we were small. I didn't really manage a big team. When I joined Perceptive, I actually, it's funny, I applied to take over a group and I got the job. And one of the reasons was because it's a much bigger team. So the first thing was to really understand, like, how do you lead leaders, right? That's the first thing. It's like, how do you grow leaders? How do you grow managers? What do you have to consider? Right? And then you have to think about the team and the vision of the team, right? And like, where do you want to go and understand like where you fit in the business? The other part that was really interesting was I was actually given a P&L. So I had profit and loss, which is really a great experience. We had revenue and then we had costs and we had to figure out to make sure that obviously the group was profitable. And then on top of that was another great experience is we had acquired other companies who then merged their cloud teams into mine. And so these are pretty great experiences like, hey, how do you integrate an acquired company? How do you lead a team and involve it both from a technical perspective and also a people perspective? The training in terms of like how to be a better manager, I think the thing is it's not just about the training, it's about this you can learn too. How like sometimes there's things that's like mystical, like, oh my gosh, like people management, it's mystical. You just have to be good at it. No, it's like any other skill. Yeah. There's leadership skills you need to build. Right. There's leadership capabilities you need to build. And at that time, it was really understanding like, oh, this is how you grow as a leader. This is where understanding how I should think about having better conversations about careers with people, thinking about how do I talk to executives? How do I present? Because we had to present a monthly report to the CEO. So that was experience. So it's like, those things you don't necessarily get as a startup founder, right? You might be the CEO yourself. Yeah. But in this case, it's kind of like you're learning sort of how to behave in a business and sort of the different roles and responsibilities. The other thing that was super important that then I learned and taken, to Netflix is really about relationships, right? Both about building a relationship with colleagues as well as building a relationship with customers. How do you do that? How do you network, right? Actually, networking internally is a super powerful skill. Yeah. Not a lot of people do it, right? And I still find it fascinating. I'm like, yeah, just go talk to the person. It's like, I don't want to talk about them. I'll just ping them, right? And so that's a skill that you learn. It's like, hey, there's a lot of parts of the business. How do I learn more about that part of the business and increase my understanding? And then how do I lead in that context? My ability to engage with engineering teams and the professional service teams and the support teams and things like that. Like it was a hard journey. It was actually really tough for me because I hadn't worked in that big corporate environment, that many people. It was like thousands of people. That was the biggest company I worked for in my career. And so I was actually thrown in the other way, not just thrown into startup world, you were thrown into corporate world with lots of complexity and lots of dynamics and relationships. And it took a lot of skills and learning. But I think that's the other thing about leadership is you have to do it. Right. You can't just read about it. You got to do it. Yeah. Right? Luckily, I was hired to be in that position. But I knew it would give me so much experience in terms of like growing as a leader in multiple areas. I have this saying that's like, engineering is not a software problem, it's a people problem. It's about how you get a large amount of people to work together to execute on a business idea or on a product idea. And I think that's where, as you learn more and you understand more, you realize like it's sort of this triangle effect. It's people leadership, technology leadership, and business leadership. You need all three, right? That's what I love about, before when I think about why I like being a CTO or like early founder was because I got to do all three. Yeah. It wasn't just one. You need all three to make it work. And I think it just took time. It just took time to see that. And something that I also found fascinating is you would see very successful companies that didn't have like the best cultures because they had product market fit. Yeah. It almost doesn't matter. Like that's what's sad. It almost doesn't matter. You could have any crazy rules. Yeah. As long as you got the right business, not that it will be sustainable long term. It's almost like the business fit and be able to sell to your customers is almost the number one priority, right? Yeah. But now, obviously, as a person and human, you were like, hey, I want to do it the right way too. And I believe in certain values that I think this is how we should do it. And so I just find it fascinating that like, when you talk about product market fit and you hear like, Mark Andreessen talking about that, it's just a word, PMF, let's get PMF. Yeah. But what it's really telling you is like, you need to have customers that want to use your stuff and pay for it. And we talked about pivoting earlier, that's when you pivot. If people aren't buying it, maybe you need to change what you're selling. Yeah. Right? And so I think it's just, for me, it's just over time as I learn leading teams. And it's funny because the second startup really taught me this, right?
Yeah.
The second startup was awesome. It was a Norwegian company, really great culture, really great founders. We didn't sell anything. So it was awesome experience, but we couldn't sell. And ultimately the business failed because we didn't get enough sales. And I think that taught me a lot. It was a great experience, but if you can't get the business to work, it's not going to work.
Right, exactly.
You know? And that's why I also tell people failure is a way better lesson. You learn through the failure, you learn like through what didn't work, you know? And I think that taught me a lot in that failed startup as much as
yeah, it's indeed, failure is actually such a great places for learn. Like either ideally it's like you learn from other experience, so you don't have to feel that much. That's but also you really need also experience enough among the failures yourself to really learn the nuances on that.
Yeah.
Times where you hear this story about founders are so successful, oftentimes it's more like the marketing message. I have never seen like people just like so lucky, and even if they do, they probably has this survival. But most of the successful founders are actually went through their own journey. They didn't. There's no chance for them to tell you this thing. But actually, what happens in the middle is really the thing is very, very important. For example, one thing you mentioned about is the realization of like 3 types of leadership in a startup. That's actually the same thing. I also realized that I'm doing my startup.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing my second startup. You also do 2 startups. But I started getting more and more learning through the process. They help me a lot. If you are founder with technology background, leadership, obviously you won't have that. And then you realize it's not just about technology. You need to build product that actually people pay or spend money, or you have a way to get resources. So business leadership is equally important. You have to have the business savvy, like what type of technology people will pay. Like this well leads to like the decision you make every day. Like all the resources you have, you will gonna prioritize the one that more likely lead to product market fit. And that's a whole journey to learn. And then you realize that as you go through the pivot all the time, and because that's what the market needs you to do this pivot, and your team needs to be in the same with you. They need to stay motivated. They still need to have the enough skills for executing your new vision. You have to have the ability, the people leadership, to ensure that you have a strong team and resilient team and a flexible team, so that you have the tools to do all the things. And this all needs to come together. And oftentimes if you are working in a corporate, if you are like pure TL, you focus on tech leadership. Or if you are focusing on the business side, you focus on business leadership. Or if you are a people manager, you focus on people leadership. The same thing in the startup. Now that like if you're missing any of them, you're gonna not win. As a founder, you ultimately are responsible for successful business. You have to do all things.
I think there's so much involved. I'm going to get a little philosophical, right? But I feel like society rewards the end result, not the journey. So people see the like, oh, the exit or the championship. I love using this like Kobe Bryant example, right? Everyone sees his success and championship. They don't see him working, he would shoot 10,000 shots after a game. Like his work ethic is just unparalleled. And like how much he pushes himself. We're sort of looking at just the frivolous things. You don't see the actual journey it takes to get anywhere.
Yeah, one thing related to that is like I see so many LinkedIn posts of like how I made like 10 million in 5 months. Yeah, as if only if you have made 10 millions, the lessons like the learning is worth too. But I try to follow some of the tips in the posts like that. It's like highly not practical, or it's not applicable to your use case. And it's more feel like, oh, it's more like a marketing.
It's because it's you want to be success by proxy, right? I have a very simple example of like I joined Netflix. It was all of a sudden like a bunch of people want to talk to me about my leadership. I'm the same person, but it's like you brand proxy changes. It's like, oh my gosh, you must be amazing because you work here. And so I think people, whether it equates you work in a FANG company or you made all this money, then you must know what you're doing, right? And I think this is where like what makes founding journeys so hard is you just said people, business, tech, and luck. Market timing. There's so many stories of people who created a company too early. like technology that, like business idea that's like, oh, that looks just like now, but it just didn't work back then, right? Because the business dynamics didn't work. And so I feel like there's so many factors. And I think that's what makes it so hard. But then I think it's also one of those things where you have to do it to then really understand.
I understand.
You can watch all these videos you want.
Yeah,
you have to actually do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing that you mentioned about curiosity, like you mentioned about both about learning and knowing what to learn, and also about networking within the organization.
Yeah.
It's inherently what I hear is a curiosity. Like you can only grow by just curiously understand what's happening in the organization and skills you need, and you will always figure out a way, or people help you to figure out it.
Yeah.
If you have enough.
For sure.
So I'm also curious, what happened to that company?
So just so you know, it was first started by two Norwegian leaders. So super fascinating. He found my co-founder on LinkedIn and he was like, hey, can you help me with this video startup? Because I saw you created a video startup, right? And at that time, why it was called Sync FM is it was trying to sync videos in a concert. Right? So you would shoot from different angles, try to sync it, right? So I think they were looking for like a technical leader, right? Like a CTO. But then his founder, my co-founder was like, hey, you should talk to Bruce. And so then we met through LinkedIn. And I was actually CTO at a different startup at that time. We just hit it off. It was an interesting guy. And then it's like in Norway and Europe, I always had this fantasy of living in Europe and stuff like that, right? Or at least visiting. Then on top of that, he was like, hey, I'm looking to build a presence in San Francisco, right? Because he's a Norwegian company. But he's like, hey, I really need someone to like evangelize our company in the US, right? So it's kind of an opportunity to move back to San Francisco, build up presence in SF, and then also work for a European company. The island was like amazing at raising money. The Norwegian government's great about entrepreneurs. Like the sovereign fund is like one of the biggest in the world. I think it's the biggest, like helps companies. It's awesome. You only have to raise like 51% and the government would put in the other 49%. We went in there and helped lead the team. He had a bunch of random engineers. And then also I helped code on some of the stuff. And that was another thing, give me the opportunity to code and build a company. And then we pivoted to be a B2B company. So it's kind of like the B2C piece didn't work out right. And he was like, hey, what if we actually try to sell this all? And so we pivoted. And that was a very, very interesting journey. So then we kind of rebuilt the tech so we could sell it. And then I became kind of co-founder, right? Because of the new company direction. But ultimately, I think the problem in general of the video space, the B2B space, is it's not as lucrative as you think it is. And there's all these mirages. Oh, there's this big company you could sell a deal on. And I still remember getting this RFP that was like 30 pages. I'm like, they're never gonna hire us. We're like less than 10 people. There's some giant broadcasting company. And I think ultimately it was just hard to land customers when you're a small startup. And you're trying to like sign these broadcasters or some other big companies. And it was really difficult. And so ultimately, I think we just never found that product market fit. I helped rebuild the team. Actually, it was funny. My experience at Perceptive Lexmark had brought in, workers that I had worked with before that was based in Cebu. And then we built up an engineering team on that. And then I think just, you raise money at some point, if you don't have revenue, they're not going to be able to raise any. At that point, we basically ran out of money and they were trying to keep me. I'm like, it doesn't make sense. I'm like the most expensive person here. And it doesn't make sense to have a CTO. You need to like get cheap and like, sign deals. And so then we decided to fire me and then, keep the money to keep the team. And then I would consult here. And then ultimately what actually happened was he ended up pivoting the whole, he basically created a whole different business focused on construction software. We talked about earlier about how you go after the weird stuff, the stuff that people don't think about. And the construction industry is messed up, right? Like in terms of just the software they use, the technology they use is not as great, right? And so he actually took most of the team that I built and they repivoted and now they got deals. It's going pretty well actually. Yeah. So, I'm not part of that. I haven't talked to Stan in a long time, but it was a really great experience, but ultimately we just couldn't get the business to work out. And I think that was an example of you could have someone who's amazing at raising money, really well connected, you have talented team, but if you don't figure out the right market, and we even pivoted, It's just we've ended up pivoting in an area that like just is difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I think what you mentioned is also happened to a lot of founders. A lot of the startups early on, they would focus on the big deals. The problem for that is that there are so many things behind the big businesses. So initially, even if they say they would be interested in your product, but you always have %. Like you don't understand what exactly the reason why they get interested in engaging, or what is the reason why they are not paying money. And then you have this wishful thinking. Your company is completely get over the next round. If you eventually want to be a B2B company, but initially you are small. You are like, you need to be able to find a customer features, which is oftentimes individuals or small SMBs. The good thing for that is that although you might not make a lot of money on that, but nobody expects you to make a lot of money on that. You just need to make some money to prove the tractions and prove that you can scale your sales processes. And then you can figure out the future. But if you don't do that, oftentimes, especially that you're overconfident, when you have a founder who is super good at sales, but in reality, there's just this dynamic that never happens. And it's good that I think that essentially reduce the burn rates by significantly, and then relentlessly find out the new spaces. And they will figure out a way which might be completely different than the previous one, but at least that's the company will survive.
Honestly, like it gives me pride because I was CTO of a previous company. They had pivoted too, and both of those teams ended up pivoting and surviving without me, which actually gives me pride as a leader, because that's what you should be is to build a team that's scalable, that doesn't need you. And so in both cases, to see them still succeed despite it, without me there. And I one thing you also said I want to mention is the deal with the big companies sounds great, but you're at a complete disadvantage. Okay, they know you're small. Like it's unfair. And actually, I'll just tell you one last story. Is at my first startup, we couldn't raise money. It was really difficult, and we had an opportunity to land our first like $90,000 deal. Except there was a provision in the deal that they can get the source code. Okay, our entire source code. So we went back and forth because we're a SaaS company. I'm like, dude, what are they going to do with our source code? They still have to run it, right?
Yeah.
But they were like, but we can't give them our source code, right? Because they were like, well, you might fail, and we need to be able to have your source code, right? And so we ultimately walked away from the deal because it was completely all on them. We just needed the money, but they would get everything. And we decided not to do it. And we kept on going. And eventually they actually came back and said, okay, we'll get rid of because they knew it would take too long for them to write the software themselves.
Right.
But so it's like that negotiation, your business, like where you are, you have to be very careful. It might sound good, but you might actually get at a complete disadvantage because your negotiating position is not strong.
Exactly, yeah. And that's actually a very important reason why a lot of the founders drive their companies to not be successful, a good place because of that. It actually reminds me of the experience that I had when the storytelling, my last company was just initial study. Initially, we had such an awesome technology, back then no one knows ChatGPT. And we immediately get attracted to the SP500. And a couple of them, not even just one, a couple of them, started talking about the deal. Wow, startup is so great. And then we realized that thing is that you are completely disadvantaged. You feel good. You should, I'm so early. They're willing to, they had a call and talking. You feel like you have to like get a high ego from that. But then later you realize that they have all the choice on the table. And the situation gets worse when you have competitors, because initially we didn't have competitors. So it's okay. But then later when there's more and more competitors showing up, they would just like always talk to you, and you have to always talk to them. But essentially the long transfer process to them to how to use the Gen AI thing on the, and it doesn't matter for them because they have unlimited runway. But then as a startup, you have this clock ticking, and then later you realize, wow, you cannot bet on them. And they are very demanding. But eventually you will realize that you lose the chance of innovation and also actually get your product better. And in that cases, it's actually much better to build up saying that that ties back to actually B2B and B2C cases early on, because even if you want to build a B2B company, it doesn't mean that you cannot sell to individuals. There's so many great B2B companies that starting from selling individuals like Notion, like Figma. And at the end of the day, if you are selling to consumers, you have more advantages.
Well, in those cases, you're selling to individuals in an enterprise and you're basically proving product market fit. And as they use it more, they share it more. And all of a sudden, you basically can expand your presence inside an enterprise.
Exactly. So that is interesting because we were also trying this similar strategy. But there's also a part that everything like I mentioned in nuance. Initially sell to an individual this company, but then at some point we realized that how would you quantify your success extraction for that? And you will either choose to, how do we focus on more of these company accounts, and then so that you can potentially land and expand and a land account. And if you go with that strategy, you immediately hit a lot of campaigns, issues, and talking sales. Or at the same time, one thing I think the Notion or the Figma they have done is that they focus on a lot of SMBs, but the people they use that tool has a lot of decision power. Because one of the challenges of B2B is the users are different than the decision makers. And then if your process is that, okay, let's loop into the decision makers. And that potentially give a high chance to land a deal. But the problem is that if you are a startup, you do it so early, you just make yourself operate as fast as those big companies, which is slow. Where you make the choice is just focus on the users who have more flexibility, like the small SMB thing. I think there's a common myth that among the founders, they don't like SMB because they think they churn. I think it depends on the stages. In early on, having those users from SMB is a good thing because the users and decision makers, they are either the same person or they are close to each other.
By the way, that's where Salesforce came in, right? Salesforce went after SMB, smaller markets, just to go and compete against SAP early on, you know? So it's like that model of going after small companies and just iterating.
Oh, it's so much fun to chat with you. Is there anything that also the community can do for you?
I feel like, you know, if you're interested in talking to me about the journey or you want to learn more, like happy to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
right.
Thank you, Bruce.